by gender, that women who tend to suffer from stress relating to crime much more than men do, benefited much more than men from their restorative justice meeting. Finally, on our research in relation to cost-benefit ratios, we had an overall benefit of 8 to 1. That is to say, for every pound invested in these programs in England, we had an £8 benefit in terms of reduced costs of total crime. This was highly variable according to the offence. Of course, property crime, because many of our offenders, especially in the London burglary experiment, were so prolific, to have any kind of impact on their future offending had huge cost benefits. And it was in London, even though the program itself was extremely expensive to run in London, that's where we got the greatest benefit with a 14 to 1 return. But there were significant benefits across all these offence types and in all of these locations. So, in summary, violent crime, we found that it was here that there was the biggest and clearest effects of restorative justice. Property crime, we had positive effects by and large, but not so big as for the violent crime. We found that in general, in our studies at least, restorative justice appeared to be more beneficial for adult offenders than youths. We think that may be to do with two things. One, that the crimes for the adult offenders tended to be more serious, and so it was possible to engender much more emotional power in the restorative justice conference than is possible with more trivial offences. And it seems that that's a really important engine for having an effect on offenders and getting them to experience empathy for their victims. And we found that that was much harder to achieve with young people. It seems as though offenders need to have a level of emotional maturity that many juvenile offenders don't yet possess in order to really understand the consequences of their crime and to decide not to continue with that sort of behavior. And we also found that overall it appeared more effective than court alone in the post-sentence cases. That is to say that doing restorative justice for people already serving their sentences seemed to be very beneficial for them. As I've just said, restorative justice seems to be better for women victims than men, even though it's beneficial for both, and it's certainly cost-effective. So across all of these studies, significantly fewer crimes. And I'll just conclude with some policy implications that I think we can draw out of this research. We think that restorative justice deserves to be invested in more serious crimes when victims want to do it. We found it particularly effective in reducing reoffending after conviction, but we need more tests of that. We need more tests in relation to the whole issue of race and minority groups. The property experiment in Australia that failed so badly was largely driven by the absolute backfiring of restorative justice with Aboriginal young people. And when as it were, removed the Aboriginal offenders from that experiment, we found that it had been moderately effective for the non-Aboriginal population in that experiment. But Aboriginal offenders did not respond well to the way in which we conducted restorative justice. And I think there are important lessons there in relation to other minority groups as well. It's very important, I think, to have some more tests of restorative justice in the prison setting. We did have very good results with our cases, but we did not have enough cases. There wasn't sufficient statistical power really to be sure that the results we got were as good as they seemed. So I think it would be really important to do some more rigorous research in that setting. And of course, it appears that it is cost effective in reducing reoffending in all the studies where we used restorative justice in addition to court. So that's all I have for you, and I would be very glad to answer any of your questions.
Ja, det noen som har spørsmål? Så opp med en hånd, så får de mikrofonen av meg. Vi begynner her, og så...
I thank you for all this important information. There was one little question I had in mind. That's even in the negative cases, couldn't we, according to some more general values, say, was it so bad to take part in this restorative justice proceedings? There are certain values. It's the value as an old teacher, the value of having a chance to understand a bit more. It's to be drawn into the process. And it's also for those working in the mediation, even if I dislike that you only have professionally trained people in it, it's also good for them. So I would like to hear if you think you shouldn't broaden the criteria. We should have a sort of broad insights. And when we think on everything learned in the ordinary school, most of it is nonsense. But here it's important matters taken up for discussion. That's fine, even if it goes completely wrong.
Well, I suppose we take it as given that we do not wish to encourage an intervention that will result in more crime. We can see that there are benefits for victims even in those studies where there was subsequently more offending by the offenders who participated. But we don't think that it's probably either sensible or ethical to recommend a program that may result in more crime. At the very least, I think we have to be sure that restorative justice is not causing harm. Now,